This is what you need right here. You need 2 rotors, hardware kit, very important, silicone compound, set of rear brakes. First off, you want to clean this rotor with brake clean. Most of the rotors coming brand new has this anti-corrosion oil, and you really want to wash this off before installing, because if you just install this, the brake pads will burn this oil, and it's gonna smell pretty bad, and you'll see smoke coming out of your wheel when you test drive. You want to use some lint-free shop rags. Put a good coat of brake clean on top and just wipe it off. You could do this several times to have a thorough I like to do the front first. This is from a brand new rotor. Now use the second clean one. Do it one more time. Now if you didn't clean it, all that dirt would have been transferred to your new brake pads. Now when you're done cleaning your rotor, I like to sit it this facing up, so the surface area doesn't touch anything and contaminate. You have to do this to the second rotor also. Now every now and then you'll see wheels with a lock nut on it. You're gonna need their key. And make sure you don't use any impact on this, because once you get this stripped out, it's a pain in the ass to remove. So I'm going to use long handle ratchet and a 19mm. And while the tire is on the ground, that makes it easier for me to break these loose before I jack it up. You will have to do this with all the wheels that you're going to remove. Find the spot. Now all these are loosened up, so when I raise it up, I should be able to loosen it with my hands. After you safely jacked up the wheel, and make sure the rear wheel is off the ground, you can remove the tire. If you have difficulty removing the tire, you could just simply give it a kick on the outer edge. Whenever I come across these double layer cardboards, I usually save them because you can just slip it under with the working area. First, it's great on the knees. Second, it makes cleanup a lot easier after you're done with the brakes. After you're done with the brakes, everything will be on the ground and you could either discard the cardboard or just slide it out and it doesn't harm your floors at all. While the parking brakes is still on, this is the best time you can remove these retainer screws. Not a lot of cars have them, but when they do, they're pretty hard to remove if it's never been removed before. So based on this is probably the first time this vehicle's been in service for rear brakes. It only has 60,000 miles. So this, I'm anticipating that it's gonna be pretty hard to remove. First thing I do is a little bit of penetrating oil. And you could spray a little bit through here so that when the rotor and the hub is to be removed, it's a little easier. I've always used the impact screwdriver for this. It makes the job a lot easier. The size here is usually a number 2, JIS, Japanese. You can tell when there's a dot right next to the hex. One trick for these is I usually get the proper bit as close as possible. I tap it with a hammer so it seats pretty well before I use the impact screwdriver. Make sure you turn it counterclockwise because there's a left side and right side. If you don't twist it counterclockwise, it might over tighten it. That one came off pretty easily. This one wasn't that loose. Lucky me. I'm gonna leave this here for when I remove the caliper, the rotor doesn't try to fall out. First thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna remove this bolt right here. This is for the caliper hose. And by removing this will give me the free range of motion that I need when I remove this caliper. And I will need to screw in the piston. So I will use a 3/8 ratchet with a 3-inch extension and a 12 millimeter socket. I always try to use 6-point as much as I can because I don't want any chance of stripping. I always have a habit of screwing the bolt back into the cavity so that I'll know exactly where it goes. After loosening the caliper hose bolt, I'm going to start removing the caliper bolts. I'm going to remove the caliper bolts, and then inside there'll be the caliper bracket bolts. Every time you come across a floating caliper, you're going to come across these two. Only fixed caliper has just 2 bolts holding the caliper and go straight to the spindle. But in general, rare brakes, just expect to see 2 caliper bolts and 2 bracket bolts in the back. These are 12 millimeters. Now the caliper came off pretty easy, but if you're having trouble removing, you can usually stick a screwdriver or a pry bar in between here and give it a light pry, and it should free it up. What you're fighting is the layer of rust that's usually built up. And once you overcome that rust, it should come out pretty easily. Usually you want a bungee cord to hold on to the caliper so it doesn't put too much stress on the hose. But in this situation, the parking brake cable is supporting some of the weight of the caliper. So I'm just going to leave it like this, and this gives me the best angle to retract this piston. As you can see, the pads are almost worn out. Also, keep in mind of the orientation of the pad. And the orientation the piston, you want it symmetrical. We have new hardware kit, so we're going to replace these later. Now we're going to remove these 2 caliper bracket bolts. Make sure you see the 2-piece, because if you remove these 2, these are for the bearings. These are 14 millimeters. With that all removed, you can now loosen the last retaining screw of the rotor. Now there's a lot of rust built inside whenever there's a hole. So sometimes I like to tap it. But that still gives you trouble. You can always come over here. There's 2 extra holes that are threaded. And if you have the appropriate bolts, you can usually hand tighten this. You can usually screw this in slowly, and what it will do is slowly push against the hub and pull the rotor out. Make sure this surface is fairly clean when you install the new rotor, because if there's any dirt, thick dirt, the rotor won't sit flush with the hub and you'll cause vibration on your brakes. Now before you install the new rotor, just keep in mind where the screw is and you align it with the rotor. When you put these screws back, you don't have to tighten it too tight, because these screws are just from the manufacturer. When they assemble it, they can hold the rotor in. You could give it a wiggle, see if it's flush. Now sometime you'll come across a hardware kit where it has 2 sets and you're confused of what to use. The manufacturer usually give you, whenever there's 2 possible applications, they usually put it on one kit. You just have to find the one that fits yours. In this case, I'll be using this set. And this one you could save in your toolbox in case you ever need it. I'll be using this one, so I'll save this in case I ever come across a hardware kit that I need. It'll save me maybe $5–10 bucks. I apologize for that. My phone battery went out, so to resume where we were at, you want to remove these clips. And we have brand new clips. I already cleaned this off with a wire brush. I just sprayed a little bit of brake clean. And I used this wire brush, cleaned it off. Clean it off. these clips right here, the ears latches on, and that's what keeps this down. I'll give it a good push so it sits nice and tight. Same thing on this side. If it doesn't sit tight, there's a chance that it might vibrate on you when you drive. Now with these caliper pins, I already cleaned it off. You want to Now it matters where these go. You have to keep a really close look. You would miss this if you don't pay attention. Notice there's these grooves. It's not perfectly round. And take the bottom one off. It's round. Now it's there for a reason, so you don't want to mix it up. I usually put one. I usually put a line on both ends. And while I install it, I twist so it gets all around. Now you see that pocket of air right there? You want to get rid of that. So what you do is you press and you sort of just pick on it, and then the air will eventually find its way out. See right there? Because if you have a pocket of air inside, you're pretty much compressing air at all times. Same thing over here. I'm going to do 3 lines. Now greasing these pins are really critical. Because this is what allows the caliper to slide on the bracket. So again, twist. Make sure this seals. Perfect. No air. If it doesn't seat all the way, you risk water going in there and contaminating the grease. So we're all set with the caliper bracket. So with brakes that don't have automatic adjusters, you won't see these slots. Whenever you see these slots right here, most likely you have to screw these back in. So you can find these in auto parts stores. As most of the applications, I'm going to use this side. Fits right in here, right in between these slots. I have my ratchet and my extension. So the idea is to screw it clockwise back in, and you'll see it go. You want to go slow. Once you start seeing this boot starting to go with the piston, you want to back off. But normally going slow is key. You could use needle nose pliers. See how the boot went with the caliper? You want to back it out now, because you don't want to get that tangled up. And back like that. And I feel a little resistance. So if you take a look right here, it's pretty symmetrical. You want it like that. Because this brake pad, you have to keep in mind, whenever you see these notches in the brake pad, that means it has to sit inside a groove. So sit like that. If you have this sideways, this will start sitting here and you'll have uneven pad wear and performance. Now that the caliper piston is pushed back in, you can unclip the hardware. And replace it with a new one. These do lose tension. You could reuse it, but when you have a brand new one, I highly suggest you install it. You put it in the back over here and you just clip it right on. So when the caliper is on, it's putting tension on the back of the pad, so it sits. So I'm going to reinstall the caliper bracket. These up. I like putting the indicator inside because that's usually where it wears out first, and you want the indicator to let you know that you're low on the pads early than late. So it's a common practice that they apply a little bit of grease on the side of the ears. It assists the pads from, it assists you only need a little bit. Don't put too much. If you put too much, you'll start gathering a lump of brake dust. Now when you have the pad over here, just move them up and down. As you can see, I have no play, but it has the free range of motion sideways. So there's very low chance of this having vibrations. When you have old retainers and thickness, the thickness is thinner than the newer one, and that's what will give you that little bit of movement up and down, and that's usually where your noise is coming from, because your caliper is squeezing this brake pad into the rotor, and the pad has a little bit of movement to move, and that's when it causes squeaks. Now we're ready to install the caliper. I'm putting tension on this head. I'm putting tension over here to put my caliper bolts because this new spring is pushing against the pad and not aligning my caliper. So once you get it, a couple of threads, you should be good. You see, as I'm tightening it, it's spinning the whole pin. So what you need to do is get a wrench and hold on to it. Don't over tighten these. These things are usually less than 20 pounds of torque. Don't forget to reinstall the first thing we took off. Now whenever you're done with your brakes and everything's secured, you want to slowly pump the brakes, and that will allow the brake fluid to press onto the brake pads and fill in the gap. And to adjust the e-brake, make sure you torque your wheels to spec. And I pump the brakes and I apply the parking brake. And I'm going to torque this to spec. I'm going a star pattern. And I always end by going back to the first one I get.